Sharpe is a series of historical fiction stories by Bernard Cornwell centered on the character of Richard Sharpe. The stories formed the basis for an ITV television series wherein the eponymous character was played by Sean Bean. Cornwell's series charts Sharpe's progress in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. He begins in Sharpe.The as a private in the 33rd Regiment of Foot, who becomes a sergeant by the end of the book, and an ensign in the 74th Regiment, who is transferred to the newly formed 95th Rifles as a second lieutenant during Sharpe's Trafalgar. He is gradually promoted through the ranks, finally becoming a lieutenant colonel in Sharpe's Waterloo. The stories dramatize Sharpe's struggle for acceptance and respect from his fellow officers and from the men he commands. Sharpe was born a gutter snipe in the rookeries of London. Commissioned an officer on the battlefield, he overcomes class in an army wherein officers' rank is often bought. Unlike many of the officers with whom he serves, Sharpe is an experienced soldier. Sharpe is described as brilliant but wayward in Sharpe's Sword, and is portrayed by the author as a loose cannon, a highly skilled leader of light troops. He takes part in a range of historical events during the Napoleonic Wars and other conflicts, including the Battle of Waterloo. The earliest books chronologically are set in India, and chronicle Sharpe's years in the ranks and as an ensign. He is known as a dangerous man to have as an enemy. He is a skilled marksman and grows to be a good swordsman. In most of the novels he is a rifle officer, armed with a 1796 pattern heavy cavalry sword and Baker rifle, although by Sharpe's Waterloo he has also acquired a pistol. He is described as being 6 feet tall, having an angular, tanned face, long black hair and blue eyes. His most obvious physical characteristic is a deep scar on his right cheek, which pulls his right eye in such a way as to give his face a mocking expression when relaxed, but which disappears when he smiles, which is not too frequently. By the end of the series he has had 3 children and 2 wives, although not at the same time. Early years. Richard Sharpe was born in London circa the 26th of June 1777 to a prostitute residing in Cat Lane and an unknown father. When Sharpe is 3, his mother is killed in the Gordon riots, leaving him an orphan, with no other known relatives to claim him. Sharpe is deposited in Jem Hocking's foundling home at Brewhouse Lane, Wapping, where he spends his days picking his assigned quota of oakum. He is malnourished and regularly beaten, resulting in his being undersized for his age. Because of this, he is eventually sold to a master chimney sweep to train as an apprentice at the relatively late age of 12. Fearing the high mortality rate among apprentice sweeps, Sharpe flees to the rookery of St. Giles, and is taken in by prostitute Maggie Joyce. He stays under Maggie's protection for 3 years, learning various forms of thieving. After killing a gang leader during a fight over Maggie, he escapes from London to Yorkshire at the age of 15. It is possible that Sharpe learned to play cricket in Yorkshire. As in Sharpe's Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington attests that Sharpe bowls fiendish. He also played while training with the Rifles at Shorncliffe Redoubt. Within 6 months of his arrival in Yorkshire, Sharpe kills a second man, the landlord of the tavern where he is working, in a fight over a local girl. To avoid arrest, Sharpe takes the King's Shilling, joining the 33rd Foot. As a result of the blandishments of recruiting Sergeant Obadiah Hakeswill, the regiment is first sent to Flanders in 1794, where Sharpe fights in his first battle at Boxtel. The next year, he and his regiment are posted to India under the command of the British East India Company, India. In 1799, Sharpe is sentenced to 2,000 lashes for striking a sergeant with the connivance of his company commander, Captain Charles Morris, but is released after only 200 by executive order. He is assigned to accompany Lieutenant William Lawford on a secret mission to rescue Lawford's uncle, head of British East India Company intelligence, Colonel Hector McCandless. They joined the Tipu Sultan's army posing as British deserters but are later exposed and imprisoned. Lawford teaches Sharpe to read while they are imprisoned in the Tipu's dungeon. Sharpe escapes during the siege of Seringapatam, killing the Tipu Sultan after destroying a mine meant to devastate the British army. Sharpe is promoted to sergeant, as has been promised, for his successful efforts. He also gets away with a fortune of jewels plundered from the Tipu's corpse. Sharpe serves 4 years as sergeant in the armory in Seringapatam. In 1803, while on official business at the fort at Chase Algoan, he is the only survivor of a massacre of the garrison carried out by a turncoat company officer, William Dodd. As a result, he is taken by McCandless on a mission to identify and capture Dodd. The search takes them first to the siege of Ahmednagar and then the Battle of Assaye. Towards the beginning of this battle, Arthur Wellesley orders his 6 infantry battalions to form into 2 lines, with his cavalry as a reserve in a third. His allied Maratha and Mysore cavalry are instructed to remain south of the Kaitna to keep in check a large body of Maratha cavalry which hover around the British rear. The opposing General Pullman soon recognizes Wellesley's intentions and swings his infantry and guns through 90 degrees to establish new lines spread approximately 1 mile across the isthmus, with the right flank on the Kaitna and the left on Assaye. When the dragoon orderly attached to Wellesley is killed in the early stages of the battle, Sharpe takes the man's place, and so is at hand when Wellesley is unhorsed among the enemy. Sharpe defends Wellesley against several Maratha horsemen and so saves the general's life, receiving a battlefield commission for this act of bravery. He joins the 74th Regiment as an ensign, the first step on the career ladder of a British Army officer. Unfortunately, both Sharpe and his new colleagues find it difficult to adjust to Sharpe's new status and role, and his superiors in the 74th arrange for him to be transferred to the newly formed 95th Rifles Regiment. Before leaving India, he takes part in the assault on Goa for commanding troops in action for the first time. Once inside the fortress, Sharpe finally confronts Dodd and kills him, receiving a scar on his right cheek as a legacy of the fight. Campaigns in Europe. While traveling from India to England to take up his post in the 95th Rifles, in 1805, Sharpe is caught up in the Battle of Trafalgar, his first direct encounter with France and its European allies as an infantry officer. On the journey he also meets and falls in love with Lady Grace Hale, the wife of a politician. Grace sets up home with Sharpe at Shorncliffe but dies giving birth to the child, who survives her by only a few hours. Sharpe's fortune is assumed by the lawyers to be part of Grace's estate and seized. Sharpe falls into a deep depression, worsened by conflict with other officers in the Rifles, who relegate him to the role of quartermaster, and leave him in barracks when the regiment is posted to the Baltic in 1807. Sharpe, unable to sell his commission, plans to desert. He returns to Wapping to rob and kill Jem Hocking, the abusive master of the foundling home where Sharpe was raised. Before Sharpe can disappear with the stolen cash, he encounters General Baird, a former colleague from India, who recruits him to protect John Lavisser, a Foreign Office agent sent to negotiate with the Danish Crown Prince. Lavisser betrays Sharpe and forces him into hiding in Copenhagen, where he witnesses the bombardment of the city and the British capture of the Danish fleet. In Sharpe's Spray, Sharpe is now referred to as a second lieutenant because, as a light infantry unit of the British Army, there are no colours and thus no ensigns in the Rifles. In Sharpe's Rifles, Sharpe is said to have fought against the French in Portugal at Roliça and Vimeiro, both in August 1808. Sharpe is now a lieutenant in the 95th Rifles, having been promoted, most likely thanks to seniority. This view is further supported by the promotion of Warren Dunnett. In Sharpe's Spray, Dunnett is a captain, while in Sharpe's Rifles, Dunnett is a major. This means that the old major of the 2nd Battalion in the 95th Rifles died in 1807. Dunnett, being the senior captain, took his place. The senior lieutenant in the battalion became a captain, and Sharpe, as the senior second lieutenant, became a lieutenant. The promotion takes place after Sharpe's Spray, but before Sharpe's Rifles. By early 1809, Sharpe is in Spain with the 95th Rifles, undertaking the terrible hardships of the rearguard of the retreat to Corunna. Cut off from the main body of the army, he is forced to take command of a handful of surviving but mutinous riflemen, while protecting a small party of English missionaries and assisting Spanish partisans in the temporary liberation of the city of Santiago de Compostela. After making the way to Portugal and taking part in the Battle of the Douro, Sharpe and his surviving 30 riflemen are attached to the Light Company of the South Essex as part of Wellesley's Peninsular Army. Sharpe takes part in a number of notable actions, either with the South Essex, or on detached duty for Major Michael Hogan, Wellesley's head of intelligence. These include the capture of a French Imperial Eagle at the Battle of Talavera in 1809, and storming of the breaches at Badajoz. He also takes an active role in the First Siege of Almeida, the Battle of Busaco, and of Barossa, Ciudad Rodrigo, Fuentes de Honoro, Salamanca, Vitoria and Toulouse. Over this period he rises in rank from lieutenant through captain to major, eventually taking unofficial command of the entire regiment. In parallel, Sharpe's friend and colleague, Harper, rises from rifleman to regimental sergeant major. His intelligence work for Hogan and Wellesley brings him the long-lasting enmity of the fictional French spy master Pierre Ducos, who conspires several times to destroy Sharpe's career, reputation and life. Sharpe possibly appears in Simon Caro's The Fields of Death, although his surname is not confirmed. A major in the 95th Rifles called Richard, and who, unusually for an officer, carries a rifle like his men, delivers captured French orders to the Duke of Wellington indicating the enemy's intention to fall back to Vittoria. Prior to the Battle of Waterloo, Sharpe is appointed aide to the Prince of Orange, so finally achieving the rank of Lt. Colonel. Disgusted by the prince's dangerous incompetence during the course of the battle, Sharpe deserts his post, but comes to the aid of his old regiment, Prince of Wales' Own Volunteers, steadying the line and preventing a French breakthrough. Wellesley then gives him command of the unit for the remainder of the battle. Retirement. In 1820, Sharpe, now retired and living as a farmer in Normandy, is commissioned by the Countesses of Muromortu to find her husband, Don Blas Viva, who has disappeared in the Spanish colony of Chile. Both she and her husband had encountered Sharpe in 1809, during the events leading up to the assault on Santiago de Compostela. Accompanied by his old companion, Patrick Harper, Sharpe travels to South America, and becomes involved in the Chilean War of Independence along with Lord Cochrane. En route, Sharpe finally meets Napoleon, in exile on St. Helena. Relationships and family. Sharpe, the son of a prostitute, has almost no memory of his mother, and no knowledge of his father. The author, Bernard Cornwell, in answer to a query on his website, wrote a riddle which he claims contains the father's identity. Take you out, put me in, and a horse appears in this happy person. No solution has yet been provided or published. Sharpe is both a romantic and a womanizer. In Sharpe's Rifles, Harper notes that he'll fall in love with anything in a petticoat. I've seen his type before. got the sense of a half-witted sheep when it comes to women. In India, Sharpe asks for permission to marry Mary Bickerstaff, who later leaves him, and has a brief affair with Simone Joubert, who bolts with gems he left with her for safekeeping. His relationship with Lady Grace Hale in 1805 has a more lasting impact. The birth of his first child, who dies only a few hours after his mother, leaves Sharpe deeply distressed. Sharpe also conceives a child with astronaut Skovgaard in Copenhagen, but she is murdered by British spy master Lord Pumphrey. During the early years of the Peninsular Campaign, Sharpe's affections are torn between a Portuguese courtesan, Josefina La Costa, and the partisan leader Teresa Moreno. Teresa bears Sharpe a daughter, Antonia, in 1811, and marries Sharpe in 1812, but is murdered a year later by the renegade Obadiah Hakeswill. Sharpe leaves his daughter to be raised by Teresa's family, and, as far as is known, never sees her again. Over the same period, Sharpe also conducts affairs with an English governess, Sarah Fry, Katerina Veronica Blasquez, a blackmailing prostitute, and the French spy Hélène Leroux. For some years Sharpe carried a small portrait of Jane Gibbons, taken from her brother's murdered body. In 1813, he returns to England to fetch reinforcements, and meets, elopes with, and marries Jane. Sharpe remains faithful to his second wife, until she herself proves disloyal, when Sharpe is falsely accused of theft and murder. She embarks on an adulterous affair with Sharpe's former friend Lord John Rosendale and steals the fortune Sharpe had accumulated in London. It is while searching for evidence to clear his name that Sharpe meets and falls in love with Lucille Castaneau, the widow of a French officer killed in Russia. Although unable to marry while Jane lives, Sharpe settles with Lucille on her family estate in Normandy and raises two children, Patrick Henry, who becomes a French cavalry officer, and Dominique, who ultimately marries an English aristocrat. By 1861, Patrick Henry, then a colonel in the Imperial Guard cavalry observing the Union and Confederate armies during the American Civil War, mentions that his mother is very lonely, so it may be assumed that Sharpe has died sometime before the date. This is contradicted in the television adaptation Sharpe's Challenge, set in 1817, in which Sharpe claims that Lucille has already died. Promotions. Historical achievements. Despite being a fictional hero, Sharpe is often portrayed as the driving force in a number of pivotal historical events. Cornwell frankly admits to taking license with history, placing Sharpe in the place of another man whose identity is lost to history, or sometimes stealing another man's thunder. Such accomplishments include disabling a booby trap laid for the British soldiers assaulting Seringapatam, killing the Tipu Sultan and looting his corpse, saving Arthur Wellesley's life at the Battle of Assaye, storming the walls of the inner fortress at Goa and opening the gates to the besieging forces, sighting the boats that allowed Wellesley's forces to ambush Marshal Nicholas Salt's forces at the Battle of Oporto, being the first British soldier to capture an Imperial Eagle at the Battle of Talavera, successfully assaulting the central breach at Badajoz, deliberately triggering the massive explosion that destroyed the fortress of Almeida, carrying the news of Napoleon's invasion of Belgium to Wellington at the Duchesses of Richmond's ball during the Waterloo campaign, firing the shot that wounded the Prince of Orange during the Battle of Waterloo, forcing him to retire from the field, taking command of a regiment driving off the advance of the French Imperial Guard at the Battle of Waterloo. Novels, short stories and non-fiction. The first book was written in 1981, with Richard Sharpe in Spain at the Talavera campaign in 1809. The next 7 books were written in order up to Sharpe's siege in 1814. The novel, Sharpe's Rifles, was written next, set earlier in 1809 at the time of the retreat from Corunna, Spain. The next 4 books follow on from Sharpe's Siege up to Sharpe's Devil, set in 1820–21. Then came Sharpe's battle, set between Sharpe's Gold and Sharpe's Company. Cornwell then moved to the beginning of Sharpe's army career in British India with Sharpe's Tiger, set in 1799, beginning a series of 3 books, closing with Sharpe's Prey, set in 1807. Cornwell followed this with 2 novels and 4 short stories which lie between Sharpe's Rifles and Sharpe's Devil, in addition to the fiction series and the fictional retelling of the Battle of Waterloo. Cornwell published a non-fiction book, Waterloo: The History of 4 Days, 3 Armies and 3 Battles, released in September 2014, timely for the 200th anniversary of that battle.